Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Regis University, and I'm the Director of Education at Ragdale. Thank you for joining us for Ragdale's Creative POV Artist Talk with fiction writer Kathy Fish. Kathy Fish's fiction has been published widely and anthologized in Best Small Fictions, Norton's New Micro, Best American Nonrequired Reading 2018, and is forthcoming in the Norton Reader. She has published 5 collections of short fiction, as a core faculty member for the Mile High MFA at Regis University in Denver. Fish also teaches online workshops and just finished her residency at Ragdale earlier this year. She'll be interviewed by Margaret Hawkins, who's the author of 3 novels, Lydia's Party, A Year of Cats and Dogs and How to Survive a Natural Disaster, and a memoir about her sister after schizophrenia, the story of my sister's reawakening. She writes about art for VAS and is currently a senior lecturer at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And she's been teaching Ragdale's High School Arts Intensive for Ragdale over the last 3 weeks and over the last 12 years, I should say, and leads several interviews with our school fellows for the Creative POV Artist Talks. Kathy and Margaret, thank you for being here. I turn it over to you, Margaret.
Thank you, Regin, and thank you everybody for showing up for this, what I hope will be a really interesting conversation with Kathy. I know Kathy's part of it will be interesting. I'd like to begin by asking you, Kathy, for our audience, maybe most of you know this, but just to kind of define terms, you're known for your insightful, incisive flash fiction. I'm wondering if you can define that term for our audience and explain how flash fiction differs from other literary forms that it might seem to resemble, such as the short story, the lyrical essay, or the prose poem.
Sure, and thank you, Regin, and thanks, Margaret, for having me here too. Flash fiction, basically, at its most basic, is defined as a story fewer than 1,000 words. That was what it was defined as initially, and continues to be so in some circles. But I think that it has evolved over time, and now I and a lot of people see flash fiction as its own unique form. So separate, as you said, different from short stories, in that it because you have this limited space, you have to make more use out of, say, image and metaphor, language per se, and also it's a form that lends itself very well to experimentation, innovation, things like that. So I personally am starting to see flash becoming shorter, actually. As Julia Anderson had actually made the comment before we started that 1,000 words now seems very long to her. And I tend to agree that when a story gets to be 1,000 words and maybe has scenes and things like that, then it's closer to a short story. And I think there are parallels between flash and poetry for sure, flash and prose poetry. And I think, Margaret, that when we spoke before, the way that I see the difference between flash and prose poetry is that prose poetry can have an arc, can have a plot, a meaningful change, but a flash fiction must have it in order to be flash.
Right. I think that's a great distinction. Yeah, very interesting. Kind of along that train of thought. When last week when we spoke, I asked you where you got your ideas, and you said you write your way into inspiration. I find that so interesting and so true, and I wonder if you would speak to that.
Yeah, I love that question, and you know, as a writer yourself, you've been asked that many times, I'm sure, and I have begun sometimes with a very distinct idea in mind, a very very clear plot in mind. And for me, whenever I start that way, I'm bound to fail. Because I just I can't realize what I had up in my head, and it just falls flat. So yeah, as to what I had said before, I write into a story. So I will just sort of free write. I'll begin with an image or a line of dialogue or a rhythm very often, and then somewhere in the context of just writing words, something will click usually. So my page, my notebook just is a mess. I just write all over the place, and then something clicks, I'll circle it or I'll star something, and then at some point it'll lead me into an instance or a story or a scene, and then eventually I do go to the keyboard and start typing.
Yeah,
But
I was going to say.
yeah, ideas are so nebulous.
Right, right. And then the minute you pin them down, they're not nebulous anymore. And that's a problem too, because
Right.
suddenly you've trapped the butterfly and pinned it down.
It's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Well, two questions come to mind that aren't even on my list. And but one of them is, how do you know when you're done?
Well, I'll tell you, a lot of times I write beyond my ending. And so I have to go, I guess that's where revision and editing comes into play. Because I find that if I cut the last few sentences or even a paragraph, I've got a better ending. But done isn't the same thing as ending. So done to me feels like on repeated readings, especially reading out loud, that there's no hitch. There's nothing that bugs me or feels not fully realized. So if I can read the story out loud and it pleases my ear, and it feels like I landed it well, then I can say I'm done.
And then you put it away and you don't work on it anymore? Or do you go back and keep like revising and reshaping?
The best advice I ever got was to put a first draft, even if you feel like you're finished and it's done, put it away for a couple of weeks, go back to it and look at it again. But I've never been one to dash off a story and submit it. So, I will let it kind of ferment for a while before I send out.
Yeah, amazing what horrors you find when you return to a story. At least I do.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. Interesting. You talked about your notebook, and I know you told me before that you start all your stories in a notebook. You don't write online. At what point do you make that shift, and do you experiment with the process? Do you write on index cards or Post-it notes, or do you carry your notebook everywhere and write in the post office while you're waiting in line?
I do that sort of thing where I write down ideas as they come to me, inspirations and things like that. In terms of when I go from the notebook to the keyboard, it gets to that point where I can't write fast enough. It's clicked. I know where I'm going, and I need to type. So that's when that happens. And sometimes it doesn't even happen. Sometimes I continue to scribble and never get anywhere. But I do go back sometimes and flip through my notebook and find, little pieces of things when I'm stuck, and just kind of take off from some piece that looks interesting.
Yeah. What is your notebook like? Like, do you have a certain kind, or do you like to trade off every time? And do you date them? Do you have multiple notebooks?
So I like the really good quality paper. So I get Wired, I think is the brand, and it has a good thick writing surface. And I could talk all day about notebooks, but I don't plain and ordinary as possible. And I used to be very bad about like just picking up the notebook and opening it wherever and beginning. Now I'm good about taking off where, starting where I left off. But yeah, I just love my notebooks. And I have a little notebook that I carry around with me in my purse.
Do you then transcribe what you write down in your little notebook to the big notebook?
You know,
Or
no, I don't, it's enough for me to write it down. And then I don't transcribe anything usually. As long as I have it written down, recorded with a pen, I tend to hold it in my brain enough to write from.
Right, right. We could do a separate session just on notebooks. I'd love to hear more from you.
Yeah, my favorite aisle of the store is the stationery aisle.
Yeah, me too. I like these cheapy ones too. I have to admit.
Yeah, yeah.
I can drop them in the.
I tell you, I'm left-handed, so pens are huge for me. I've tried so many different pens because when you write with your left hand, your hand goes over the ink and you smear. So I've had to try several different brands.
Interesting. Well, maybe we'll do a second session.
Not that interesting.
I would love that. But back to the art of writing. What is your favorite thing about being a writer or writing? Is there one part of the process, or is there one part of the identity? What is it that just that really gets you, that you love?
Well, I think there's somebody that was quoted as saying that, was it Dorothy Parker, or who was it, that said she hated writing, but she loved having written. And kind of that way, in that I love when I finally have a story or a piece of writing that never existed before, and it's out in the world, and I've found a way to express what I wanted to express somehow. And gosh, that just feels like a miracle to me, especially now, to make art, under the worst of circumstances, and then to get it out in the world. And it's nice when people read and respond to the work. So I think that's my favorite part about being a writer.
Yeah. To the expression and the communication, the connection with other minds. Would you say? Yeah.
Sure.
When you're working on something, what does your work day look like? Do you write first thing in the morning? Do you take a walk first? Do you write continuously, or do you take short breaks? I know I once read an interview with a writer who said he would take naps, multiple naps during the day, and then every time he'd wake up, he felt like he could write a few more sentences.
Oh, wow. Must have gotten something out of the process of sleeping. I am a slow starter. I wake up super, super, super early in the morning, but I have to have, my coffee, and I have to settle into the day. So usually, I go for my walk, I drink my coffee, I respond to emails, I do whatever. And usually I'm kind of a mid-morning writer. So I have this little space. This is my writing space in our basement. And it's so nice because I'm cut off virtually from the rest of the household. And I usually work for about 3 hours. Before
and they can't hear me.
And I can't see you anymore, Margaret, but
Oh,
there. Oh, there you are. So yeah, I just I run out of steam after about 3 hours. I'm very in awe of writers who can spend an entire day writing or can write into the evening. I just, if it hasn't been done by 3 o'clock, it's not going to get done for me.
3 hours sounds like a day of work if you're actually writing.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. What are you working on now? I know I asked you that before, but and you had various really interesting projects going on. Can you talk about some of that?
Yeah, so one of my main projects right now is working on a sort of a flash fiction guidebook. And I'm not writing it as a textbook per se, or any sort of academic sort of thing. but it's based off of my workshops. So I'm using some of the, incorporating some of my prompts and exercises, and then hopefully down the line, also work that's been produced from my workshop. And I see it as kind of a inspirational work more so than like I said, like an academic text. So I'm working on that. I'm trying to get as much actual new writing done right now before the semester begins. I'm sure you can relate to that. And so I've got pieces in the works, but it's all still flash fiction, no novel or anything like that.
Do you write while you're teaching? I mean, not literally while you're teaching, but during the semester?
Yeah, I try very much to. With my teaching work, and I know you can relate to this, sometimes it's difficult to get in the headspace for writing.
Right.
Even if I have, say, an hour free, my mind is still sort of on the teaching and the stories that I've read for my students and things like that. But I do try to stay with it. I have a writer friend, and the two of us meet on Zoom, and we write once a week together on Zoom, and it's just, hi, how you doing? We catch up for about 10 minutes, and then screens are on, but we're got our heads down and we're writing. So that keeps us both sort of accountable, I think.
How do you do that? I remember you said that when we talked, and I thought about it later, and I wondered what that meant. Do you do you work from prompts, or do you just work on your independent projects?
We just work on although that's a good idea, we should try that. We both have our projects. She writes a lot of poetry, so sometimes she'll sit down and work on some poetry, and we just work independently. Once we start, we don't talk to each other until our timers are set.
And then do you read?
No, we've never done that either. It's just strictly a writing time together.
Interesting. So it's motivational. Like you're seeing the other person writing, so you're...
Yeah. It's like being accountable. I know a couple other writers who did the same thing over the course of, I think, a couple of years, and they both wrote novels and published them. Just by doing that, just by like face to face, and they said that they started to learn each other's tics, and getting up and moving around and frustrating, looks on their faces and things like that. So it's kind of fun I guess I was inspired by those two when I started with my friend.
Yeah, it's such a personal experience. I mean, do you experience the emotions of your characters? For instance, I mean, do you cry when you write, or do you feel exposed when you write with someone, I guess?
I think that aspect of it is one downfall, at least for me, is that I would do that if I wasn't on screen. Mm-hmm. And I don't do it when I am on screen. So it's possible the writing doesn't go as deep. I'm not sure. I know that for me, that once I'm done with my on-screen writing with my friend, then I will be inspired to keep going. But it's good to then be off screen and do, like you said, sort of get really into it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Okay, let me change direction a little. Can you talk about some of this is a paired question, writers who have influenced you, writers you love the most, and those might not be the same, and also kind of how you became a writer?
So I got a late start in terms of actually taking writing seriously. I always dabbled in writing and enjoyed writing, but I didn't really understand or know about literary fiction. I worked in DC when we lived out in the DC area, and I commuted to work, and I would read things like Stephen King, which, no disrespect to Stephen King, but that's the sort of thing that I would get absorbed in and read.
He's a good writer.
Oh yeah, and very, I missed stops on the subway many times because I was so absorbed. But I didn't, you're in high school and you're reading kind of dry stuff that doesn't appeal to you too much, or you don't understand it well enough to enjoy. So it really wasn't until I got older and I took a writing class when we lived in Australia, and I was so excited by this writing class, and I walked out the first day and found a bookstore, and I bought the best American short stories, and it just lit me on fire. I thought that those stories were so amazing. I hadn't read anything of that quality ever before that really spoke to me, and it was exciting and so well written. And that's when I started thinking, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Wow.
So, that's how I came to know, writers like Joy Williams and Evie White and Marilyn Robinson, some of those writers that I don't do what they do, but when I read them, I want to write myself. So you can be inspired and learn from people that show you a whole new way of approaching writing. It's really exciting.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I was thinking about how picking up a book, even, not to read the whole book, but while you're writing, or, in a writing day, just to read a little bit of something that's really good to kind of, to prime the pump sort of. But, so that relates to my next question, which is, do you have a remedy for writer's block, or do you even believe that it exists? Some people say, it's not true. It's, you sit down and you work. But if you experience it, how do you break it?
First of all, I absolutely believe in writer's block, and I think it's mean when people say there is no such thing.
It is mean.
It means that they particularly haven't had writer's block. But
it's like saying there's no such thing as depression.
Yeah, just do some yoga, you'll be fine. So yeah, absolutely, there's writer's block, and I've had periods of time in my life when I'm stuck for even a couple of years. In those times, what was important to me was to not lose my connection with writing and not lose my connection with the writing community. So those were times when I wrote book reviews, did interviews, read a ton, and stayed connected. But in terms of getting back to the writing, I know that my own workshops, not to plug them, but just to say that a lot of people come to my workshops and say, oh, I'm so blocked. I haven't written anything in months. I don't know what to do. And I think that the structure of the workshop being, we talked about this, the all positive feedback, very important. And also just to keep throwing new exercises and prompts at them so that they don't have time to get inside their own head too much. So having to turn over a new piece of writing every day within a very small, very supportive group. Man, it just seems to, they read each other's and they get inspired from each other, and it unblocks. It definitely unblocks them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's how I teach too. And sometimes I try to reverse engineer my own classes onto my, onto my own psyche, because I think they're like little tricks that work, that distract you from your quandaries and just trigger this impulse to put words together to have meaning.
Right. And what I do too is give a exercise, but then I'll say, if you're really stuck, start with this and give a sentence, like I remember, or my mother never, or things like that, and just say, fill it out and just keep doing that over and over again. Invariably something happens and clicks for them.
Yeah, that's a good one. My mother never. I like the second time it happened.
Oh, that's a good one.
Because it forces them to start in the middle.
I'm going to steal that.
I'm going to take my mother never. We'll trade. Do you like collect prompts, or do you teach spontaneously?
I have lots of craft books and things like that that have prompts in them, but it's fun for me to make up the prompts myself. Mm-hmm. It's another creative thing to do. So yeah, I just will. My guide for prompts is the quality of the writing that stems from the prompt. So I'm always testing. And if I do a prompt and I'm really bored with what comes out of it, because I think a lot of times the prompt needs to be good. So some of the prompts that I've tried have fallen away, and I've discarded them because it just doesn't make them push and write really good stuff.
Right.
So if something routinely results in really good writing, then I stick with that.
Right. Do you ever use the prompts for yourself? Do you, or does it work? Or is it like trying to tickle yourself? You can't make it happen.
That's a great way to put it, because it seems like I am once I get a prompt going, that I've read so many stories that stem from the prompt that I almost can't get out of those, results. But there is one that I just say, it's very basic. I just say, write 50 sentences, one right after the other.
Yeah.
And then when you get the 50 done, then go back and read them. And the ones that have some energy, some juice, start at the top of the page and write that again. And that one seems, I could do that one, and that seems to get some writing going every time.
Yeah, right. It seems like the act of just writing, the actual physical act, with a pencil or a pen on paper, create something. If somebody is inclined to tell stories or make meaning out of words, that it doesn't, they don't have to know what they want to write about. It just it circumvents or detours around logic.
I think it's a means of sort of tapping into your subconscious. I think the stories are always there in your head, and if you can bypass, like you said, trick the subconscious to let things flow out. And the thing I like to hear most of all from a class is when people say, I don't know where that came from. That really surprised me.
Right?
Yeah, I love that.
I love that too. And it's always something really good.
Mm-hmm.
Something juicy and meaty and
I love that too.
Great. Do you write down words that just sort of excite you, that you collect words?
Yeah, I do. I don't do that as much as I used to, but I did do that early on when I would, kind of increase my vocabulary when I read, and I mark up books and things like that. So yeah, words for sure.
I kind of get crushes on words that I want to use.
Yes. And then you go back and you read like 10 of your stories, and it's that word is keeps showing up.
Right. It's true. Do you have a favorite book?
Ooh, that's a very good question. Wow. I don't know if I can rattle that off right away.
Yeah, you don't have to answer that if nothing comes to mind. Some people just have something that is so dear to them, they just immediately respond.
Well, okay, so I've read Anna Karenina 4 times.
Okay.
And so that certainly is a favorite. And it's just because that's such an interesting novel, because every time you read it, it sort of gives you something new. So when you're 20, and there's parts that, speak to you when you're 20, and then you read it when you're you're 40 or whatever, it reads very differently because your life has been different. So I would say that is a novel that certainly certainly a favorite of mine. And I would say the short story collection, Honored Guest by Joy Williams, is a strong favorite of mine, just because everything is so fresh and new and strange and intelligent and funny. So I really love her writing.
I love her writing too. I love her strangely articulate children.
Oh, yes. She does kids really well.
Yeah.
Strangely articulate is a good way to put it. Yeah.
It's like they express their thoughts. If they only could construct sentences, that they would speak that way.
Yeah. She's excellent.
But that's a good way. That's a good way to frame what is your favorite book, to say what books do you reread? Is that really?
Yeah, I think that's the key, is the ones that you go back to every time.
Right.
Definitely. And I'm a huge rereader. I know life is short, but if you've got the books that you love and do something for you, why not?
Why not? Are you a fast reader or a slow reader?
Pardon?
Are you a fast reader or a slow reader?
Oh, that's an interesting question too. So if it is nonfiction, if I'm reading for information, I read very quickly. I know how to, I got the gist of that. I can skim over, I can go to the next thing. Really, really good fiction though, slow, very slow. I'll read a paragraph, read it again. So I tend to read slow because first you're reading for your pleasure and then you're reading as a writer and you're saying, how did they do that?
Right.
This sentence. Yeah.
And the sound.
The sound. Yeah, for sure. I've started reading things out loud actually in my room, just to hear it in my ear. It looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat box.
Oh, wonderful. And I think Regin is going to take, hi, Regin. I think he's going to take those. So that's a signal to me to ask you my one last question, which is, do you have any advice to either young writers or emerging writers? They don't have to be chronologically young, but, writers who are kind of starting out in their writing career. What would be your advice?
I would say the thing that I always had to remind myself early on was that I could write whatever I wanted to.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Don't you forget that, though?
Yeah, totally.
You forget that, and there are no limits, and there are no topics that you should take off the table, no experiments that you should take off the table. Just go for it and write whatever you want, because that's where the cool stuff comes anyway. And I think, that's what sees me holding people back sometimes, is they think they have to write like so-and-so wrote, or they have to write this kind of story, or they shouldn't, have monster stories, because monster stories aren't cool. So yeah, that would be the one thing I would say, is just remember to write whatever you want.
That's great advice. That is really good advice. Wonderful. Kathy, thank you so much. I think we have these questions. I know Regin is wanting to go ahead with the next stage.
Yeah, actually, Margaret, you could keep going, but we do have a couple of questions from the guests, and Julia is curious to know what do you read for pleasure, that is with your writer's brain firmly turned off?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I tend to be a little bit like, I know that I don't write or read enough genre fiction, and I really want to change that. I want to start reading some, mysteries, and maybe not romance, but, just going outside of my own head. But I really do read literary fiction for pleasure, and again. Sometimes I will go back to some of the things that I read to my children. My daughter's actually in the audience, and I read to her all the kids actually. I read the Little House on the Prairie books.
Oh,
I just love those, and I also read Anne of Green Gables books.
Yeah.
So those sort of, well written, but sort of children's fiction sort of things. The E.B. White books, Charlotte's Web, The Trumpet of the Swan, things like that are just beautifully written and fast to read and very, very engaging. So that kind of thing.
I'm a big fan myself.
Yeah.
I'm rewatching all of the Little House shows actually, because
Really? Oh, wow.
endless hours. But Rebecca actually has another question. She says, hi. She's wondering if you think there's something fundamentally different about how you approach flash versus longer forms.
I mean, yeah. So with flash, I think that you have to think of it as this sort of little piece of art that is. So you read a flash in 3 minutes or 4 minutes at the most. You just sort of have this sort of self-contained feel about it. So for me, with flash, the sound is really important. The rhythm of the prose, that one emotional, takeaway tone from the story. So I approach it quite differently because I don't give myself scenes most of the time in a flash fiction. I don't think in terms of that breakdown. So I feel like I can do anything with chronology. I can do anything with form. I can do anything with the prose itself, and you can be a little more crazy with your prose, more experimental when it's only going to be a paragraph or 2 or 3 pages. Whereas I think with a short story, you have to sort of keep the reader more in mind and have that narrative, that distinct arc. So yeah, very, very different approach, I think, from flash.
And I actually want to turn it back over to Margaret, but before that, I was hoping that you could just say a little something about your time at Ragdale, mostly because this is, of course, going to be used as a resource for our students who use this as a resource. Obviously Margaret's teaching her class, but we have these educator guides and all of this other opportunities for people to tap into the artistic pool that we have on a regular basis. So can you tell us a little bit about the residency?
Absolutely loved the residency. For me, so I had a February residency, and it was cold and snowy. I just loved it because it made me focus, use my time, and I wasn't distracted. I'd go for a walk once a day. I'd just bundle up and go out and walk on the prairie and think. I'm reading right now a book by David Lynch. I'm forgetting what the title of it is, of course, because I'm not as smart as our president. But I'm reading a book by him, and he says something about you need 4 hours of time, uninterrupted time, to create 1 hour's worth of good work. And that's more than anything what I got out of Ragdale was all that time and focus. And so I would sit in my little room and look out the window, and maybe not writing the entire time, but the creativity that happens when you have that space and you're away from home, it's just invaluable. So I got a lot done, and I really enjoyed the time, and I enjoyed the community then at the end of the day, communing with my fellow residents and having dinner and debating and just the liveliness of that was very inspiring for me.
Melanie mentions that Lynch talks about that in his masterclass, about how crucial it is to have uninterrupted time and space.
Oh, I'll have to take that masterclass. Yeah, the book is really good that I'm reading. Thanks, Melanie. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, what would you like to add to close it out?
What to add? I guess just, we're in a really unprecedented time. I know that's been said a million times. And things are very hard right now. So I would say if you're not writing and creating to maybe give yourself that break. Some people are able to put their heads down and focus and get lots of writing down. But if right now you're not, I think go easy on yourself. I think eventually it will come back. You know, this is something that needs a lot of processing, and you know, maybe just allow yourself some time to process. I fully expect that when we get to the other side of this, and I hope we will soon, that there'll be sort of a really huge artistic resurgence from, you know, people of all, you know, artists and writers and musicians.
Margaret?
Catching the big fish, yes. Melanie mentioned is
Okay.
catching the big fish. Yeah.
Great.
Regin, you were saying?
Oh, I was actually turning it over to you to have the final question or the final word for Kathy.
Okay, you know, I asked my one final question about a prompt, but I have one more question. I always do. Kathy, you've spoken a couple times about an artistic community, and how, you know, what is the importance of that, and how does a writer, because this is a particularly solitary art form, how does a writer find a community if they don't already have one?
I feel for people who feel isolated and don't have that community, because I think it really is important. It certainly was very important for me early on to be amongst other writers, most of whom were better writers than I were, more accomplished, smarter. So I think it's super important, and it's hard. There's a lot of heartbreak and rejection and frustration in the writing world. I see, as much as I hate to, you know, encourage people towards social media, I see the writing community on Twitter to be very, very supportive. There are factions that are often fighting with each other, and there's bad things too, but for the most part, especially in the flash fiction world, people are warmly welcomed into the fold. They just have to say, hi, I'm here and I'm trying to write. And really everyone goes out of their way to encourage and bring people into the fold and share resources and encourage and help promote each other's work. So, I mean, I would say Twitter, it's the only social media that I use. In classes, go to readings, but there's a lot of readings on Zoom that are easy to hop onto and watch, and some of them give you some time to interact with the writers. So yeah, I definitely encourage anyone who's a writer to find their community.
Wonderful. I hope next time we meet like this, you'll read something.
Oh, that'd be great. I'd love to do that.
I'd love to hear it. Thank you so much, Kathy and Regin and everybody for showing up.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming to this. Thanks, Margaret.
Thanks.
Thanks all. And just to close it out, I hope you enjoyed today's Creative POV Artist Talk. I think you all know this has been recorded and will be available for viewing on Ragdale's website and our YouTube channel soon. In fact, all of our Creative POV videos are available there. Along with this, especially for teachers and students, please know that we are creating a set of educators' guides in PDF format, which will also be available on our website. So please look into that. And you can also look further into Kathy's work at kathy-fish.com and Margaret's work at margarethawkins.com. We'll have supplemental links, as I said, images and prompts for further creative exploration. Our next Creative POV Artist Talk will be next week at 11 a.m. when Margaret returns to interview our very own Sam Lewis, our Director of Communications and also puppeteer and performer. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Regin. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you.